What's up everyone, Big Dan here, and in this video we're doing the ultimate Dragon Age romance tier list. Now I'm sure that everybody watching this video will agree with every single choice I make on this tier list, and no one will have any problems with it at all, right? So buckle up, grab your iced coffee, and let's dive into the Dragon Age romance tier list. So first up we've got Leliana. Now, Leliana is one of my favorite characters in the entire Dragon Age franchise, probably my favorite character in Origins, and I love the romance with Leliana. I played as a dwarf one time. I think that was the first time I ever did the Leliana romance. It's really cute, really fun, and really interesting to see how she sort of comes around to love the Grey Warden. And so I gotta put my homegirl Leliana on the S tier. It's one of my favorite romances in these games, and Leliana is one of my favorite characters, so no surprise she's on the S tier. Next up, we've got Morrigan. Now, Morrigan has a really phenomenal romance in Dragon Age Origins. It's interesting to see how she sort of like grows out of her shell. Like when you meet her, she's very closed off, kind of misanthropic. She grew up in the wilds with her mother, didn't really have contact with a lot of people, and so she doesn't really have those social graces that some of the other characters have. And over time, she comes to sort of like break out of her shell and learn to actually connect with another person. And I think that makes her romance really interesting and engaging. But of course, it is a little bit disappointing how things turn out towards the end of the story, considering that, you know, basically the only reason that she agreed to come along with your party was to perform the dark ritual at the end of the game and acquire the soul of the old god. So there's a little bit of a betrayal arc in there, but you can actually continue to pursue her through the Witch Hunt DLC, which is also fairly interesting. But Morrigan's romance is really good, one of my favorites in these games as well, and also going to end up putting Morrigan on the S tier. So next up we have Zevran. Now Zevran's probably one of the thirstiest characters in these games. He grew up in a House of the Night, let's call it, in Antiva, and really just openly flaunts his sexuality. He likes men, he likes women. You can even have a threesome or a foursome with him and Isabela at some point in the game. And I don't know, it's just the Zevran romance and Zevran's character arc, he's just pretty wild overall. That being said, I mean, the romance is what it is. It's kind of like a fun-loving character. There's not a whole lot of drama with Zevran or anything, and not a huge character growth or character arc overall. I think the only thing that really happens with Zevran is he kind of, you know, starts to entertain perhaps a life where he could do something other than being an assassin or being on the run. He also openly says, like, look, I'm gonna sleep around, and I'm sleeping with everybody, so if you're not on board with that, it is what it is. So I don't know, it's a fun romance, but it's not the most like dynamic one in these games. So ultimately, I'm gonna put Zevran on the B tier. Next up, we've got Alistair. Now, Alistair's romance is really interesting because not only because of his personality, but because of the role he plays in the story in Origins and how different things can play out with the romance arc with him depending on your character's origin story. Now, if you play as a female human noble, you can actually marry Alistair and essentially become the queen of Ferelden alongside him, which is a really interesting arc. You can also potentially become his mistress if he ends up marrying Honora, and you could do that with multiple backgrounds. Yeah, I think that makes it really interesting to see, you know, how different things can play out depending on your background, depending on your choices. And of course, Alistair's just one of the most charismatic, fun characters in these games. So much like Leliana and Morrigan, we're going to put Alistair on the S tier. I'm actually going to slot Alistair at the top of the list so far. Even though Leliana is my favorite character, I just think that because of the different outcomes you can get with the royalty line with Alistair, I think that makes his romance a little bit more interesting to me. So next up we have Anders. So Anders' romance is really interesting. It's full of red flags, of course, and it's one of those like tragic romances, right? Where, you know, like, this probably isn't going to work out very well, given that Anders is possessed by a spirit of justice. And, you know, obviously if you play Dragon Age 2, you know how the story ends up with Anders. And overall, it makes the romance really interesting, but really tragic as well. It's very similar to the Solas romance in that sense. Honestly, I think it's one of those, like, you know, super interesting, super passionate, super fun romances, and also incredibly tragic. So I think from a story standpoint, obviously if you go that route with Hawke, it's like, this is probably not the best decision, but at the same time, it makes it that much more interesting and dramatic and intriguing to me. So again, also gonna put Anders on the S tier. So there's a trend here. A lot of the romances in Dragon Age are really, really good, really well written. Actually, I will slot Anders above. We'll put him just below Alistair, actually. I think that's where we'll put him. Next up, we've got Fenris. I always have mixed feelings about Fenris's character. I think he's definitely got an interesting backstory. But again, I usually play DA2 as a mage, or pretty much all of the Dragon Age games I like to play as a mage character or a warrior character. And my first playthrough of Dragon Age 2, I played as a mage, and his attitude towards mages and towards Hawke when Hawke is a mage really just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And that kind of carries through into the romance as well. Ultimately, I feel like there's just a lot of baggage with Fenris. It's a very rough around the edges kind of character, and that comes out into the romance as well. Overall, not my favorite romance. I do think it's a really solid one. One of the better ones in Dragon Age 2 for sure. Not quite as good as Anders in my opinion, but I will put Fenris on the A tier, actually. So next up, we got Isabela. Isabela is another character, much like Zevran, who's just kind of fun. You know, obviously, she's very promiscuous. She's one of the characters that you can actually have the threesome or foursome with in Dragon Age Origins. If you do that and bring Zevran along, or bring Isabela along when you meet Zevran in Dragon Age 2, there's actually some unique dialogue with that as well, which is kind of funny. Ultimately, I don't feel like Isabela's romance is the best. It's one of the ones that I like to do in Dragon Age 2 if I'm playing as a male Hawke character, or sometimes I'll do it as a female Hawke as well. But for me, Isabela, I like the romance a lot. I'm also gonna put it on the A tier. It's not the most riveting one of all of these other romances in the games, but I really like it, mostly just because I like Isabela's character. I think the romance arc itself is probably more along the lines of a B tier, but because I like Isabela's character a bit more, she gets a bit of a boost on the list for me. So next up, we've got Merrill. Oh man, Merrill's just too awkward for me, I think. She's just too awkward. She's one of those characters who really struggles to interact with other people, but unlike Morrigan, who has more of a reason for it in terms of not actually having contact with other people, Merrill grew up in a tribe, but she was just kind of the black sheep of the tribe because she's really into blood magic, basically, and everybody's kind of afraid of her for that. So she spends a lot of time in Dragon Age 2 just trying to learn how to interact with other people. The romance is kind of adorable, but it's definitely not one of my favorite ones. So I will put Merrill actually on the B tier. So next up, we got Sebastian. Sebastian is F tier. Okay, moving on. All right. I mean, what else is there to say about Sebastian? He's an annoying character. He really grates on me. Particularly his sort of like outburst at the end of the game after the Chantry is destroyed. It's just, I find him to be incredibly irritating as a character, and that also extends into the romance. So, yeah, Sebastian's F tier. All right, moving on into Dragon Age Inquisition. We've got Cassandra coming up next. So Cassandra has one of the best romances in these games, I think. She starts off as a really rough around the edges, kind of hard-ass character, and doesn't really open up a lot to you initially. And depending on how you interact with her early on, she might be a little bit standoffish to the Inquisitor. Ultimately, as you get to know her better, she starts to open up more about her background, about how her brother was killed and by mages, about how her first love was a mage and how that guy ended up dying as well, and just a lot of the tragedy that sort of like shaped her into the person that she is today and sort of created those walls and those rough edges. But as you interact with her in like a romantic sense, you can kind of get her to open up a little bit, and I find that to be very well written and very interesting. So I think Cassandra's romance is one of the best ones in the Dragon Age franchise, so I'm actually going to put her up here on the S tier as well. I'll slot her just above Anders. I feel like also Cassandra's a little bit more stable than Anders as a romantic choice. You're gonna have a healthier relationship with her than you would with our homeboy Anders. So next up we've got Cullen. Cullen is a fan favorite. I think he's probably going to be on the S tier and maybe even the top of a S tier for a lot of characters. I like his romance a lot, but at the same time, he's also very restricted. I think you have to be either an elf or a human character to actually romance him. He's also a crackhead. So he's a crackhead. He's addicted to delirium. He can kick the habit, but I mean, is that going to dock him any points in your book? The guy's addicted to delirium. So anyhow, I think the Cullen romance is really solid, and you know, I like Cullen as a character a lot. He's very, very noble, very compassionate, very passionate, and really dedicated to the cause and helping people, and you kind of see that arc through all of the games with him. Overall, I'm going to put Cullen in the A tier, though. We'll dock him just a little bit because he's a crackhead, but overall, he's a really good romance option as well in Dragon Age Inquisition, and I think his romance arc is really interesting. So next up, we have Dorian. Dorian's one of my favorite characters in these games. I also think the romance arc is really solid. In typical BioWare fashion, we've got another character who has daddy issues, which if you've played the Mass Effect games, you know a lot of these characters have daddy issues that you have to sort out. His parents and his family and Tevinter society in general don't approve of homosexuality, so that was really tough for Dorian to be like openly who he is, and he decided to go that route even though it kind of destroyed his relationship with his family. But you can sort of bring about some reconciliation with that during his personal quest if you choose to go that route. I think the romance is really solid too. I think, you know, it's one of the better ones in these games, but considering the S tier is a little bit crowded, I don't think I'd put him quite as high on the list. I will put him in the A tier, though. I do think that Dorian has one of the better romances in Dragon Age. Next up, we got Iron Bull. I really like the Iron Bull romance. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's just interesting to delve into his character a little bit more and get closer to him. I think the time I did the Iron Bull romance was with a dwarf character, and there's a hilarious cutscene during the romance where your character has to stand on a stool to be like tall enough to actually interact with Iron Bull. It's so funny to me. And yeah, I really like the Iron Bull romance overall. Because Iron Bull is one of my favorite characters as well, I'm going to actually put him on the S tier. We'll slot him just below Morrigan. I think the Iron Bull romance is great. It's not the most dynamic. Obviously, like Iron Bull, he's less about making that solid commitment. He's like, why do we got to put labels on the relationship, baby? Let's just do this thing. And I don't know. I don't see a huge change in that throughout the game. I mean, I guess there's a little bit of a shift during the DLC that you could potentially get with him if you want a more deeper commitment, I guess, to his character. I think if Iron Bull weren't my favorite character in these games, along with Varric, I would probably just put his romance on the A tier, but again, much like Isabela, he gets a boost just because I like Iron Bull a lot. So next up, we've got Josephine. Again, another really solid romance in Dragon Age Inquisition. I still don't think it's the best. I think the quest where you duel the other lover who's trying to like win her heart is kind of funny. That's kind of an interesting thing. Obviously then helping her out with her family who's gone flat broke and trying to basically win back their position in Antivan society. Kind of interesting as well. It's interesting too to see Josephine unwind a little bit because she's so high-strung and high-achieving and always focused on work. She's kind of like Cullen in that regard. And so to find some moments where you can kind of like get her to just relax a little bit is really cool to see that side of her character. Overall, I would also put Josephine in the A tier. We'll put her just below Cullen. Really good romance, really good option, especially if you're playing a straight male character in these games. That's probably one of the better choices, along with Cassandra. All right, next up we got Blackwall. Another betrayal, another liar, another betrayal. The red flags are all there, ladies. I think, yeah, you know, he's got the beard, he's got the bravado, he's got the Grey Warden nobility, even though he's not a real Grey Warden because he never did the joining. Blackwall's, his romance is kind of fun. I feel like it's not one of the best ones in these games, though. I feel like it's just kind of more of a middle-of-the-road thing. I mean, you do have some interesting arc there with the betrayal and how you could sort of turn him into a changed man who kind of accepts who he is, I guess, to a certain extent. But at the same time, we're going to put Blackwall on the B tier. Next up, we've got Sera. Oh my god. So one of my first playthroughs of Dragon Age Inquisition, I actually did the Sera romance. I think it was my second playthrough. I played as a female elf character, and I was like, let's see how this goes. And my god, her romance is really annoying. It's really grating. Again, Sera's one of those characters that doesn't really experience a lot of personal growth or changing throughout Dragon Age Inquisition, and she can be kind of annoying with how much she hates traditional elven culture or anybody who's like interested in that. So, for instance, if you are playing if you're in a romance with her and you drink from the Well of Sorrows as an Inquisitor, you basically have to bend over backwards and like totally agree with her perspective, or she'll break off the entire relationship. It's a very like childish and petty thing to do, it seems like, where she's incapable of seeing the perspective of any elves who are interested in the traditional elven culture or recovering sort of the lost glory of the past. Like, I do think that Sera brings an interesting perspective to the table, but the fact that she's incapable of seeing anybody else's perspective or why anybody else would think differently kind of docks her a few points. And that extends into the romance as well, like I said, with the Well of Sorrows incident. Also, the marriage scene that happens in the Trespasser DLC, I think is really cringe. So, much like Sebastian, we're gonna put Sera on the F tier. It's no longer completely lonely at the bottom. All right, next up, we've got probably the most controversial romance or character in these games, and we got Solas. The Solas romance is phenomenal, but again, it's one of those betrayal arcs, and I think if you play through, you romance Solas and go through the Trespasser DLC, I think the romance with his character is tremendously well written. I know that BioWare talked about they weren't initially even going to have Solas as a romance option, but then they decided, okay, we'll make this available, but he will only romance a female elven character. And that kind of makes sense given his background as Fenris and trying to basically save the traditional elves and, basically break down the barrier between the Fade and the real world. The romance, again, plays in. It's very interesting, especially that final scene in the Trespasser DLC sort of brings it all together. It's very tragic. It's very heartbreaking. But again, phenomenally well written. So I'm going to go ahead and put Solas in the S tier. We'll put him just below Alistair. Again, I think It's going to be interesting to see what BioWare decides to do with the Solas romance in Dragon Age Dreadwolf. I'm very excited to see what they do with his character and what options there are in the game, whether you can bring him around to sort of a redemption arc or whether you end up having to kill him. I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to play, and I really hope BioWare nails it. So there you have it. We got a lot of characters on the S and A tiers, and that's because the romances in Dragon Age are really well written. So there you have it. The ultimate Dragon Age romance tier list. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more Mass Effect, Dragon Age, and RPG videos. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my content. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.